Hello and welcome to our podcast on academic structured writing. In this podcast, we wanted to talk with you about a great organizational structure pattern that will help you to write those responses that are often asked of you in any of your academic disciplines. So let's go ahead and see what we're talking about here. So what exactly is this structure? We'll show you that at the end of this and talk you through what each thing kind of means, but this is a great structure that is going to work in all academic responses in all of your content classes. Whether you're writing some sort of analysis paper in English class, or a document-based question in social studies class, writing some sort of report in art class, music class, anything like that, this structure will work well for anything that is academic in its focus. So to be clear, this is not for creative writing. We would never expect someone to follow something so formulaic for a short story or a novel or a poem or a script. This is not the writing that we're talking about. This is not for informal responses in a journal where you're just asked to write about what you're thinking or feeling or responding to in terms of a text. This will work for many class assignments that are academically focused. So as you look at your assignments that you're being given by your teachers, ask yourself, where does this fit on the spectrum? And if it seems to be asking for an academic response where you're asked to synthesize, analyze, compare, contrast, any of those great constructed response verbs, then this is the structure that you'd probably want to use because it works so well with so many pieces of content. And so why does this matter? The point of academic writing is to clearly explain your thinking as a reader in writing to someone who is other than you. So the biggest part of academic writing, other than actually knowing what you're going to say, is the idea of saying what you're going to say clearly. And the beauty of this system is that the organization is predictable, and therefore it becomes very clear to the reader. Transitions help move the reader through, and it forces you to slow down and to show your thinking, not just tell your thinking, which is oftentimes the struggle that many students have. We think as students that just because we put it down, that the reader understands what's going on in our head, and that's not the case. We as writers must slow down and thoroughly explain our thinking to someone who isn't us. So as you look at this structure in a minute, you're going to see a number of boxes. And each of those boxes, give or take, could represent a sentence or two. But the number of sentences is not that important. The pattern is. The idea of making a point, following that up with a piece of evidence that shaped your point, then following that with your analysis, which is where you explain how that piece of evidence shaped your point. That pattern is what is most important. We can then take that idea and stretch it out as needed to fill our needs. So a nicely crafted paragraph response would have 3 of these PEA chunks, point, evidence, analysis chunks. That would show that you really understood something if you're able to provide 3 points and 3 pieces of evidence, and then 3 sections where you connect all of those. We could then stretch that out into the traditional 5-paragraph essay if your prompt is a little bit more complicated and takes more analysis. If you're asked to write a bigger paper, 5 to 6 pages, 5 to 7, whatever, you can just take that idea and stretch it out a little bit more. So we're going to show you the structure in the next couple slides here. Look at the point, evidence, analysis pattern and think about how can I use this to show, not just tell my thinking. In addition, add transitions to help the reader through. That's going to at least take care of the organization part of academic writing. You still need to, as writer, say something interesting, explain yourself, make thoughtful connections. That's the content piece of your writing. But if you're worried about, well, how do I take all these great ideas and organize them? Use this structure. It is so clear. It is so important to be clear. And this helps bridge that gap between you as writer and the person who's reading your paper. And so our point about being clear is because of this. The point of academic writing is less to entertain. That is more like the novel short stories. The point of academic writing is for the writer to be explaining his or her thinking in a clear manner so someone can understand their thought process. And if the reader is unclear about what the writer is trying to say or what they mean, it is the writer's fault. As an assessor of academic writing, I don't bring students' papers home and then have the student standing next to me saying, "Oh, but what I meant there was this. Ooh, you know what? I forgot to say this. You know what I really meant and should have added was this sentence." I don't have them with me as I grade their paper. Therefore, if they want me to understand their thinking as writers, they need to get it in the paper. There can't be any lack of clarity issues. I'm a pretty smart person. I feel like I've been doing this a while, so I know what's going on. And if their writing is unclear to me, it's not because I'm not smart enough to get it. It's because the writer has been unclear. And if clarity can be improved by a simple yet elegant organizational structure, I would advocate that students use that every single time because it will help the reader understand it. And so here is the structure. So this structure is going to look at a single paragraph response, and then we'll talk about how you could stretch that out if need be. Your response is going to start off with a claim, and this is a statement where the author states their topic and their position on that topic. So it's probably a one-sentence construction here, and this is where they need to take a position. This claim statement needs to be something that is arguable, not a statement of outright fact, because I don't need a paragraph to justify that this table is square. I can just look at it. But I would need a paragraph response to justify that something is better than something, that these two characters are a foil pair, that the theme of a story is, or that the certain type of taxation is a better method. Something like that. It needs to be arguable. So we need to have a statement of what you're talking about and the position on it. You're then going to follow that up with a point. So if you're going to defend that A is better than B, your first point is going to be, why do you think that? What point do you want to make about A in terms of how it is better than B? We then need to see an example of the evidence that you have in front of you that helped shape your thinking that A was better than B. Because you can't just say, because. There's probably some sort of statistic or a graph, chart, fact, map, something like that that you looked at that helped shape your thinking around A being better than B. And then this is where you need to slow down. After you have made your point, you have shared the piece of evidence that helped you make that point. The analysis section is where you need to slow down significantly and take all the time you need to make it clear to your reader why you think what you think based on that piece of evidence and how all of those pieces connect. And so we have chosen to use the colors of yellow, orangish, and then red to kind of remind us of the stoplight in our world. As we are approaching a yellow light, we have to slow down. And by the time that light is red, we need to be stopped and thoroughly explaining ourselves. We can't race through the analysis part. When we are finished explaining that first point thoroughly, and we're pretty sure that we've explained how our brain was working, then we move on to point 2. So another reason why we think A is better than B in this case. Then we relate another piece of evidence that helped shape our thinking, and then we stop again and thoroughly explain how what we observed as evidence helped us think what we thought. And then you guessed it, we make a third point, another reason why we think A is better than B. We relate another piece of evidence, and then we take time to thoroughly explain why we think what we think. When we have fully and completely done that, we end our paragraph with a concluding statement that summarizes the points that we've made. That would be a thorough, written, academic paragraph response. It goes in the point evidence analysis pattern, and it also has 3 sets of those PEA chunks. Now, you might have heard this in other forms from other classes. You might have heard it called the accordion paragraph or stoplight paragraph. And it's the same thing. But the point is just that we're not counting sentences. We're not looking for exact adherence to the number of sentences in each box. We're looking to encourage you to speak in groups of 3 and to thoroughly explain your thinking in that analysis section. And if you can do that, then you are well on your way to making clear academic responses. And so the last point we'd want to make in terms of the overall structure is that probably between each of these sentences, we need to have transitions. Again, this helps our reader to understand when we are making a point, and then when we are moving on to a piece of evidence that supports that point. And then when we are finished with our analysis, and then we're ready to go on to our second point. So it could be as simplistic as first, second, third, to kind of move through the points, or first, next, then, to begin, to continue, to summarize, something like that. The point is not to pick the most beautiful transitions that are the most full of voice and word choice. It is to be effective. And if first, second, third is what you need to use, then so be it. If it helps your reader understand you, for this type of writing, for academic writing, that is okay. So that's about all we have in terms of this structure. You're going to hear us refer to this almost every single day when we start talking about academic writing. This structure works. We have used them through our own high school writings, we've used them through our own undergraduate writings, and many of us have continued to use them through our postgraduate writings. Even as we are seeking master's degrees, we have used this basic structure and expanded it as needed. The point is, you make a point, you provide evidence as to why you think what you think, but then that analysis, that's what we need to see. That is what wraps it all together. And your approximate balance in your writing should be about 20% of your writing could be evidence from the other texts that are shaping your thinking. So those could be direct quotations or paraphrases from the text you're learning from. But the other 80% of your writing should be from your own brain. It should be your thinking becoming clear on paper. We don't just rely on quotes to speak for themselves. We actually have to take those, place them in our papers, but then thoroughly explain how those shaped our thinking. And if we can do that, that is a strong paper. So I think that's about it. As always, if you have any questions, please bring those into class. We'll get those taken care of. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.